You're listening to Scene2IQ, the Scene to Scenic podcast. We want to begin by acknowledging that we are currently broadcasting on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples, as well as the Haldeman Tract, land which is promised to the Six Nations that runs 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. We are grateful to be using this space this evening. We express our gratitude to the traditional and original stewards of this land, and at the time of recording, appreciate the work that the indigenous organizations such as Crow Shield Lodge are doing right here in Kitchener-Waterloo to include all nations in land stewardship through ceremony and public events. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Scene2IQ. I'm here with a special guest this evening, Gladwyn Badger, a local musician and artist, as well as an emerging industry professional who's got a lot of experience in various aspects of music community. And as I've learned this evening, and as you'll hear later as we talk about it in the course of this episode, some great education background, as well as some development opportunities that were provided through different culture organizations. So thank you so much, Gladwyn, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's honored to be here. It's looking forward to it.
As I am too. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a really cool thing that the community we have here in Kitchener-Waterloo. I actually met you first through Midtown Radio as you were looking to be a volunteer, and of course I'm also a volunteer with the organization. And I was excited to hear about your music and to hear a bit more about your background in music, both personally, professionally, and culturally. And so maybe that's a great place we could start. Maybe you can, for those who are not familiar with your music, because you did release, by the way, congratulations, you did release an EP last year, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And what's it called?
It's called Renegade.
Great. And for those who aren't familiar with the kind of music that you play, I know you were describing to me earlier a little bit, that's kind of like a niche maybe a bit, but how would you describe it?
So Renegade, I would describe it as, well, I would say to describe myself as an artist, I would say that I'm an indigenous instrumental surf rock inspired artist. So when I think about the music that I play in the style, well, okay, so talking about Renegade specifically, I drew a lot of influence from spaghetti Western films and like I said, I mentioned Quentin Tarantino, so Dick Dale. There's a band from Mexico called the Twin Tones. Yeah, a lot of instrumental surf music, Ennio Morricone, that kind of stuff. That's kind of where I was going with that project for the EP Renegade. Yeah, and the actual song, the Renegade itself, it's a self-titled EP, so I have a track on there called Renegade, and Renegade was a song I wrote in response to, I think it was 2020, when the indigenous children in the graves, unmarked graves, right, in Kamloops, and I just saw a lot of. At that time, we're in the pandemic, right, and there was. The internet was just a crazy place to be, when it comes to reading through the comment sections and stuff like that. And so, I'd go through the comments and read some of the things that people who I thought were my friends would be saying, and that was really hurtful. And I was really angry about it. So I wanted to write a song about it, and I didn't really know how to do it. And I wasn't really sad. I was more angry. So I fed into this idea. Okay, well, Renegade, the government would use these type of words to describe indigenous people, renegades, outlaws, these kind of things, right? So I said, okay, this song's called Renegade, and I wanted to make it kind of like an indigenous kind of inspired song. So I kind of gave it an indigenous kind of almost like melody, almost like, the chant melody. And it was like fast, it was a fast, surfy, typical surf song at first, but then it evolved into what you hear in the EP. I slowed it down. I slowed it down a lot, and I added some trumpets and stuff. That's where the, Ennio Morricone stuff, the inspiration comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat. Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so cool that you incorporate so much of your identity and culture of being indigenous into the music. And I think that's refreshing in this part of the country as well, because as I've heard, you recently, well, I won't say recently, but a few years is when you arrived here in Kitchener-Waterloo. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background, backstory, and how did you get started with music, and what made you decide that was going to be a vehicle to help channel your, the passion that you had, your culture that you have, the message that you have, and maybe to combat some of, like you said, some of these unfortunate government stereotypes.
Yeah. So I guess I would say it all like my dad played guitar. I had a couple of uncles who played guitar, but I didn't really connect with their music. It wasn't my thing. So music was never really pushed onto me, and they weren't like professional musicians. They were just kind of, messing around with the guitar, and they would play gigs here and there, but they weren't like really professional musicians at all. And one day, my dad comes into my room, and I hadn't seen him for like a long time, and it's my birthday, and he comes into my bedroom it's winter too, right? So I was born in January, and it's my birthday. I'm sleeping, and then I hear him just like walking through my house after I haven't seen him for like a long time. Comes into my room, knocks the door down. I'm sleeping. I wake up. It's just like this rude awakening, and he's got like this huge like amp. It's like, I don't know. It weighs like a ton. I've never seen anything like that. It looks like it's from like, I don't know, like the early 1900s or something. And it's just huge. It's massive. And then he has his guitar. It's this blue guitar. It has a Floyd Rose on it too, which is kind of weird. And it's this blue metallic kind of finish on it. I've never, I couldn't even tell you the name of it. If it was a Fender, I could tell you that, but it was like this off brand. I'm not even sure what it was. And he says, "Happy birthday," and there's snow. He's got his boots on there, and all over there's puddles and stuff like that on my floor. And then he says, "Happy birthday." And then he leaves, right? I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm rubbing my eyes. Oh, well, thanks. Nice to see you too. Right. So, but that guitar sat there for the longest time. And then finally I started messing around with it. And then it was my friends in high school who kind of showed me a couple things. And that's kind of, once I started learning how to put my fingers on the fretboard and read guitar tabs and stuff like that, and going on the internet and reading those tabs and putting them to the guitar, and it was starting to actually sound like music. That's when I just I was hooked to it. I was addicted to playing guitar, right? So that's where that started. But I was I was never performing. I couldn't perform. I was just too shy, right? I was just so shy. So for a long time, I was just a bedroom guitar player, right? I would just sit in my room playing guitars, just looking at, my favorite guitar players and just pretending I was them and wishing I was them, but never really doing anything about it, never having that confidence to actually get out of my room and go perform in front of people. So to say all of that, to say I joined the military, right? I was in the Army for about 3 years, from 2009 to 2012. And still, during this time, never even thought about being a musician until the military sent me on a tasking to the Canadian Aboriginal Music Awards. It was actually the Canadian Aboriginal Music Festival. So the Aboriginal Music Awards were just attached to the festival. So the festival at the time was Canada's biggest powwow, right? And when I went to the awards, so the military sent Indigenous military members there to represent, to show these are the Indigenous military members. So they sent us there, and so I went to this Aboriginal Music Awards, and I didn't really know what I was getting into until I got there. And then I was like, oh, this is like a music award show. And it was like a big thing, right? I didn't realize that it was a thing. And then I saw all the people there, they're all indigenous people, right? And they're all, they have this community, and that was really amazing for me to see, because they all know each other and everybody's like worked with each other as professional musicians. And then I see them on stage. There's these lights, there's this big performance, this big production. And I said, wow, like Native people can do this. This is a thing for us. Like we have a place, it was crazy. I never saw anything like that. So since that time, I thought, well, geez, like, I was even more drawn into music. So when I was finishing my time with the military, because I knew I didn't want to, be in the military forever. I was just kind of there short term, and, just to carry on my grandfather's legacy of being a veteran, right? So I wanted to carry that on. So when the time came for me to be over and it was done, I really had to do something. So, and like I said, music was always there. So for a couple of years after I was out of the military, I was, back home in Alberta, driving trucks and trying to make a living, and, just being just very, normal life. But I always wanted to do music. So then finally one day I said, you know what, I'm just gonna do it, right? So I went to college at Red Deer College for music. There was a music diploma program there, and I applied to that, and then that's kind of how I started. And then I started actually performing live in front of people, and I finally it was very scary. I remember the first time I went in front of those people, my peers, and it was just, I was shaking. I was so nervous because I never played in front of people, and I never put myself out there playing guitar in front of people until I got to college, and it was just the most terrifying thing ever. But that's where I learned how to, everything about music was through that. So I'm grateful for that experience. And then, so I finished my program at Red Deer College, and then I went further. I want to challenge myself further and say, okay, well, let's go to university. Wow. I'm this guy who never even understood what an undergrad was, what a graduate's degree was. I never understood any of that. So I was like, wow, let's go to university. So I went to MacEwan University after that, and I transferred and, did a program, did the bachelor's degree at MacEwan University, worked with a record label there, Bent River Records. And it was there that I saw this need for indigenous representation in the leadership, working with the record label. Like I love those people. The people at the record label were great, but I felt I was questioning, well, where's the indigenous representation here? Like there's not many artists on the label, and there's definitely no leadership here on the label. So I have to go change that. So I finished my degree, and I took another gamble, and I said, well, I'm going to apply for graduate school. This is crazy. Let's go to graduate school. And there's a program at Queen's University called the Master of Arts, Arts Leadership Program. And so I applied, and so I'm surprised that I got in. And then I had to make a big choice, and I had a pretty cushy little nest there in Edmonton for myself. I was pretty comfortable there, and I could still be there. But, I wanted to, I like to experience different things. I'm comfortable getting uncomfortable, right?
It's definitely a skill.
Yeah. So, I packed up my stuff, sold a lot of the stuff, sold my motorcycle, and made my way this way. So that's kind of how I ended up out here in Ontario, and then going to graduate school for the Master of Arts, Arts Leadership. Yeah.
Well, that's quite an incredible story. And while you were telling it, I just can't help but feel a little bit inspired, and also just like really amazing how you did put yourself out there through, like you said, like you're comfortable being uncomfortable, but frankly, for a lot of people, those are not easy decisions to make. So it's really neat that you pursued that, and it did lead to some cool opportunities with a record label in Toronto, as I understand it, as part of your grad studies. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, for sure. So after getting to, Queens, doing this program, one of my, I got set up with a placement coordinator, Jean Lesage, and she's fantastic. She's so great. Shout out to Jean. Worked really hard with us to get us to our chosen placements and did what she has to. She's well connected, but she doesn't have sometimes students can be very particular, and she has to kind of work with that, right? But for me, my goal was always to work with an indigenous label or somebody high up like that in the indigenous music realm. So there's an indigenous record label in Toronto called Red Music Rising. And the lead artist manager, Matt Ma, right? I've been following him for a little while. So I'd say to Jean, that's where I want to go. And you kind of have to pick like a couple places, right? Because you're not always going to get what you want, right?
Sure.
So, but that was always my first place. Is I wanted to work with Matt at Red Music Rising and see what he's doing there in Toronto. Because I'm this prairie boy, like small town. Going to Toronto was like a big thing, right? So, well, what is the music scene like in Toronto for Indigenous people? So I was really interested in working with him and learning about artist management. And that's kind of, while I was in the university, I learned a little bit of artist management. So that always stuck with me. And then when it was finally when the time came for me to work under somebody, that's somebody who I wanted to work with, right? So she made that happen. And, months later, I was, downtown Toronto working with Red Music Rising and interacting with all of these Indigenous artists, well-known Indigenous artists, Juno Award winners, and
wow,
just hanging out with them. Like I said, just hanging out with them, interacting with them on a daily kind of basis, and kind of learning a little bit, about them. It was just kind of crazy, It was really unique experience for me. I was just like I couldn't believe I was doing it, right? Yeah. So yeah, and I did that. I did that for for however long it was, and then yeah, I've wrapped up my time there in Toronto and had to go get a job.
and so that brings you to Kitchener-Waterloo.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then I ended up getting this gig here. At the University of Waterloo, working as events and special projects coordinator in the Office of Indigenous Relations, planning powwows, just coordinating events, managing events in the, Indigenous specific events, which is, it's a great job. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. And now that you're here, you've been here in Kitchener-Waterloo, for a better part of about 3 years now. You put out your EP, which is great. Have you had opportunities to perform here? How do you find the music community inside Kitchener-Waterloo? And have you met other Indigenous artists here? Do you see that as an opportunity or something that's still developing? And how do you find the reception of the kind of music?
Yeah, so getting here, I moved here specifically for, my role at the university. I've never been here before. Before that, I've heard of Waterloo, and there's like there's a movie, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, where they, Waterloo, and I'm like, oh, and so I was like, oh, there's a town in Ontario called Waterloo, so that's kind of what I think about, right?
That's fair. That's funny.
And that's about all I kind of knew about Waterloo, so that I get here, and starting all over again, starting fresh, right? Learning new people, learning a new community. Don't have a car anymore because when you're living in Toronto, you don't need a car.
It's expensive to even park it. So
yeah, exactly right. So it was costing me more to keep my car than and I I owned my car. I didn't have car payments or anything, but it was still expensive, and I wasn't really using it because I could use the TTC, and, it was cheaper. Right. So I had to sell it. I sold the car and I needed money. So I got this job, and now I don't have a car. I don't have anything. I don't know anybody. So then getting into the music scene, I was like, well, what do I do? Like, where do I go? I reached out to Bob Egan from the Kitchener. I didn't know who he was. I was like, well, who are the music people? I saw this person in somewhere in Kitchener, Bob Egan. It's like, well, hey Bob, like, my name's Gladwyn, can I talk to you? I want to be connected into the music community here. And then so he agrees to meet with me, right? And he's really interested in hearing. Like I said, I'm emailing him. Like, I'm comfortable with cold emailing people. And he says, okay, like, you sound interesting. I'll come meet with you. So he comes to meet with me, and then, we talk for a bit, tell him a lot about myself. And he says, oh, do you know who I am? I said, no, I don't know who you are. Like, and then he kind of like laughs at himself. He's like, well, my name's Bob. Well, okay, I know that. But like, yeah, I play with Blue Rodeo and Wilco and all this. I'm like, what? Right. And I didn't really believe him at first. And then after we finished talking, I went to, looked him up on the internet. I'm like, whoa, I was like talking to this like rock star. It was so crazy. But,
and it's amazing just again to say, like, how, like you said, you're comfortable being uncomfortable, but who would think to, like, it's almost like a little bit of a to your advantage at first that you didn't really know who he was, because maybe if you did, you'd think like, oh my goodness, is he going to want to talk to me? But you still just went for it. And it's amazing when you just put yourself out there, how people respond to that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah. And, like I said, I didn't know what the music scene was like here in Kitchener-Waterloo. But then I started going out to open mics and stuff like that, and watching the talent, and then listening to other people who I'd just come across. People hear my story that, I got this music stuff going on, and they say, oh, you should talk to this person. You should go to this place, check out this band and all this stuff. So then I started like learning. I started seeing like people like, oh, that's a music person, right? Like these kind of things. And then following them on, Instagram, they're always playing at the same places. So now I'm learning about the venues and all of these things. And then, for a bit there, I was playing in a classic rock cover band, but it just, and they were great musicians, but it just wasn't like my thing. I didn't really, I like doing that in college, university, but once I started writing my own stuff and performing my own stuff, and I still do covers, but surf style, right? Even those get a little bit, not as fun, but like, so what I was going to say was, playing in this classic rock band, I just wasn't having a lot of fun with it. So I had to walk away from that and wanted to focus more on my own stuff, because I had, wrote this EP. I don't have a band out here. I don't have, when you play the style of music that I play, you need a band. It's not like I'm not a singer songwriter or anything. So I need a band to help me tell the story. So that's kind of been like my challenge, is just finding the players, right? So I'm playing a full set here in town. Yeah.
That's fair. No, thanks for sharing a bit about your experience here in Kitchener-Waterloo. One thing I think you alluded to before as we were talking in the green room here is you also had this opportunity, now living in Ontario, to represent something in the culture organization that you were speaking of, where you're able to set up almost like a meet and greet collaboration workshop situation. Maybe I'm telling this wrong, so I'll let you correct me. In Toronto, with some of the more industry well-known folks, for 10 individuals, including potentially one of your friends who was trying to get on the scene all the way from the Yukon.
Yeah, so working with the Indigenous Music Office, I was part of a mentorship program. They sent us out to Vancouver for Juno Week, connected with industry professionals, and a mentor talking about specific goals that we had and where we want to take our career. During that whole time, I guess I made an impression on the Indigenous Music Office folks. So when I got back to Ontario, an opportunity came up for me. The Indigenous Music Office leadership program, they needed somebody who is local to Ontario to help, I guess, curate this program, to coordinate it, to plan a whole week of connecting other Indigenous industry professionals to, I guess, the people in Toronto, right? And I'm still emerging myself, right? So I have to, like I said, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Did I say that right?
You did say that.
Okay. And like connecting them with major labels, indie labels, music venues, music publishers, SoCan, Spotify, right. Apple Music, Massey Hall. Like we did a whole thing at Massey Hall, learning about their artist in residency program and all of these things. These are pretty crazy things for me to be doing. I don't know these people, but now I'm starting to learn them, and now they know who I am, and I'm connecting them with all of these other people who otherwise probably wouldn't have the opportunity to do that, right? So now we all kind of know each other, which is it was an amazing experience. It was a great week. I'm glad I got to do it. It was stressful, but it was worth it. And if anybody gets any opportunities to do things like that, I highly recommend it. It's, even though it is a lot of work, it's so worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can only imagine for the artists that you were in a way mentoring and connecting them with, like, the benefit to them. It would be so cool to check in like next year and say, like, hey, where did this lead? You know what I mean? What collaborations have happened? Who's met who, and, almost do like the way they used to do like high school reunions or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see what kind of, relationships come out of that whole experience, because, I've been done a lot of like follow up, but the little bit of follow-ups that I've had, I'm hearing some like really great things that this person has reached out, we're talking, and I'm like, that's just amazing. I love that. I love hearing that. That's, even if one person just did that, like that's like success for me,
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's really good, like in terms of just even fully representing the culture and of Indigenous music. At least, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the country, but at least here, we're getting some glimpses, whether it's through CBC or other programs. Like everybody now knows like Anasabi and like bigger names, but like even here in Kitchener-Waterloo, they have like the Directions Festival every year, and we make a point to go, and we see artists who are like, how do we not know about these people? You know what I mean? Like they're just, regardless of if it's Indigenous or not, just the music, the talent, the way they incorporate culture, the dance, drumming. It's like, it's something that, speaks to, I think, every human being who has a heartbeat can like relate to this. You know what I mean? And it's great to see that there's some programs and folks like yourself who are continuing to make those connections and push that. And I'm hoping to hear more Indigenous voices in the music community and the arts community in general.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm so, and to go back to your question about like Indigenous musicians here in the local area. I mean, I'm still trying to find those people. I do know of some traditional drum groups, within the area, but as far as, performing out in open mics or performing live, local talent, that's been a challenge. So, I mean, if they're out there, I'd love to see them. I'd love to connect with them. I'd love to work with them. Yeah, I agree.
And to that point, if people are trying to get in touch with you, whether it's just to listen to your music or whether they're looking for Indigenous leadership or connection, what's the best way to reach you?
Through my Instagram is probably the easiest way. I think, that's how we kind of got connected. Well, other than, the meeting at the Midtown Radio. Yeah, Instagram is I think that's a big way for most people to connect these days.
Yes.
So you can at gladwynbadger.music is my handle.
Thanks very much. So, do you have any upcoming projects or future things that you're working on that you'd like to share a bit more for anybody who's listening to the podcast and is now engaged and wants to hear more about what's going on in your immediate, I guess, circle, but also with artists that you're in touch with?
Yeah. So I am. So there's, like, we talked about my EP earlier. So that EP, when I released that EP, working with Mark Marilanen, was really surprised to see how well it did. I was really surprised to see, not because I think, I'm not worth it or anything, but instrumental surf music. I listen to a lot of instrumental surf music, and I don't hear it on mainstream media a lot, right?
But you can hear it on Midtown Radio.
There you go. And you don't hear it a lot on mainstream media, campus radio, or anything like that. And once it started getting radio play, I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? This was like
that is an accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you. It was kind of like a passion project almost, right? I just wanted to put myself out there as an artist. This is what I do. This is what I like. And it exceeded all expectations that I had of it. I thought it was just going to sit there, live on the internet, and not really do anything. And then, like I said, it's getting played on campus radio. It's charting top 10 CKUA in Edmonton.
Wow.
It's on reach number 2 on the Indigenous Music Countdown. There's a radio show called Reclaimed on CBC. It was on there. I couldn't believe it. A lot of artists, they kind of, that's a goal for them. And, I'm hitting, I just throwing things out there and hoping it sticks. And it's getting all of this. I was like, wow, this is instrumental surf inspired music is doing great. So, well, I feel like now I have to follow this up, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing right now, is working on a second EP. And with this one, I think, I'm investing a lot more time into, I guess, not perfecting, because, you can't really perfect anything. Nothing's, especially guitar, right? Guitar is like constantly, you'll never master a guitar. It's just, you'll look at whoever, the greatest guitar player you think is out there, totally. They're always, they'll be just as modest, they're like, I know I have a lot to learn too, right? So I've been investing a lot of money into learning from amazing guitar players and artists that I look up to. And, we do online, guitar lessons and stuff like this. And,
that's cool.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I've been working on a second EP, a follow-up to Renegade. And I'm really looking forward to, getting into the studio and putting those down. Yeah.
I mean, that's really, inspiring to hear, and I hope it goes well. And I, for one, am looking forward to hearing more from you. So that's great news. I guess, for kind of like to wrap things up, for anybody else who is listening to specifically you speak, telling your story, which again, grateful for the time. So thank you for sharing that. And they're thinking, man, maybe I have some Indigenous culture too, and I'm trying to connect to that. And I think music is a good way to do that. What would you say to help, maybe a few tips to help anybody who's in that position? Or even if you're not Indigenous or just a starting musician and they want to follow that passion the way that you were able to put yourself out there, what tips would you offer them?
I would just say, keep working on your craft. For me, songwriting was never the goal in music, I went to music school because I want to be like Dimebag Darrell. I want to be like Dave Mustaine. I want to shred thrash guitar, these kind of things. I was always a fan of surf music, but I never really saw myself doing that or being that type of an artist. I always, like I said, always want to play like Dave Mustaine or Dimebag Darrell.
Yeah, me too.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah, and
high gain amplifier.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then it was me just taking a songwriting course, just because I was curious about it, and learning from this great teacher and showing him your songs, seeing what you're just pushing the limits. So always, I guess I would just say, believe in yourself and just keep pushing the envelope and discovering new things that you didn't ever think you could do. So the next thing I'm going to do is try to write lyrics. I've done it, but it always comes off sounding a little bit too hokey for me. So building my confidence as a lyricist and writing melodies to those lyrics, right, and fitting them into a song. That's kind of my next challenge to myself, right? So just keep working. Yeah. Keep working and staying, not being afraid to approach people because you'll never know what doors can open for you. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. And I think that's the common thread that's kind of run through this that I'm taking away anyways as a lesson learned from you is, to put yourself out there, try to be comfortable, feeling uncomfortable. And like you said, you never know if you just ask for something, right? So, yeah, Gladwyn, it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story on the podcast. And hopefully we're going to hear more from you soon. Do you have any shows or anything that are coming up that people can maybe come and see you at? Or is it still just go to Bandcamp and listen to your music?
Yeah, still you can. Yeah, so no shows right now. Like I said, I'm having a time finding the players, right? But my music still lives out there. All the DSPs, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, right? All these things. So yeah, just keep enjoying it there. And yeah, just support surf music.
Absolutely. And with that, I just want to again say thank you. And to those listening to the podcast, thank you as well. Keep supporting local artists, surf music, and be creative and be well. Take care.